So, this is Redfall. It is one of Microsoft's two big releases for the year, the other one being Starfield, and I think we all know how Starfield's going to go at this point, but that's something to be concerned about later in the year. Redfall, on the other hand, was developed by Arcane Studios, the developer behind Arx Fatalis, the Dishonored series, Deathloop more recently, Prey 2017, and now Redfall. And all I can really say to that is, Arcane Studios, do you need some help? Are you okay? Because it doesn't seem like you're okay. I mean, this game launched in such a poor state that a lot of people can't even launch it at all. When they go to launch it, it just crashes. Or if they go to the main menu, it crashes and they just can't get into the game. And that's just an absolute disaster. For those of us who can get into the game and generally can play it just fine, like myself, we run into all kinds of weird performance issues where the frame rate will just drop out of nowhere for no discernible reason. We'll have lots of weird stuttering problems. It's just an absolute mess. And hell, if you're trying to play it on Xbox Series X and S, you're stuck with the graphics being downgraded, you're stuck with it being locked at 30 frames per second, and even then, it still doesn't maintain 30 FPS. That is pathetic. And apparently the controls on console are an absolute mess as well and are constantly getting in people's way while they're playing. I thought we had figured out console first-person shooter controls back when Halo was released, but apparently not. Thankfully, I was playing it on PC, so I didn't have to worry about the gamepad problems, but even on keyboard and mouse, it just feels off. It's just odd. It's hard to describe exactly what the aiming feels like, but you can probably see it in some of these clips, where I'll go to aim at an enemy and just have a weirdly odd time getting on target, and it would be an incredibly easy shot in any other first-person shooter, and I wouldn't have any trouble with it in any other first-person shooter. But again, there's just something off with Redfall that's a bit difficult to describe. It's not aim assist, because I went and tested that to make sure that there wasn't any aim assist, and there isn't any, and it's not really an acceleration problem either, as far as I can tell, because I don't feel any acceleration when I'm doing things normally. So I can't help but wonder if it's just a weird performance issue where I'll be trying to aim at an enemy and it just happens to have one of those weird frame timing skips or whatever, and that throws me off. The thing is, while that may not necessarily be that big of a deal in other types of games, in a first-person shooter, smoothness of controls and general gameplay feel are paramount, and that is something that Redfall just fails completely at. And it's not just that the controls are kind of a mess, it's not just that the game doesn't run well, it's that the moment-to-moment gameplay of Redfall is just flat-out awful. It was designed to primarily be a four-person co-op first-person shooter, which means that you get a choice of one of four characters, each of whom has 3 special abilities. 2 of these abilities are on cooldown timers, and one of them is your ultimate ability that requires you to charge it up by gathering blue energy, which is usually dropped by enemies. I ended up picking the Psychic character because she's one of the basically 2 characters that are actually viable for solo play. The other ones are really designed more for co-op play, so if you're trying to play them in solo, then there's just not all that much reason to actually make use of your special abilities. And frankly, there wasn't actually that much reason to make use of my special abilities either, because I found that just shoot at it until it dies is usually the best solution to every single enemy you come across. Human enemies with guns, well, if you're a certain distance away, then you never really have to worry about it because they can't hit the broadside of a barn. But regardless, all it takes is one headshot for the vast majority of them, and if they're one that's a bit more armored and a bit tankier, then it'll take 2 headshots. Congratulations, you have beaten every single human enemy in the game. Vampires, on the other hand, require a bit more effort in the sense that most of them are just massive bullet sponges, so you have to just wail on them until eventually they get into their stagger state, and then you can stake them to finish them off. Or if they get to their stagger state and are taking elemental damage, then they'll just crumble into dust. Some of the vampires have special abilities allowing them to siphon health from you to heal themselves, or being able to reel you in to insta-kill you, which is incredibly annoying in solo play because there's basically nothing you can do about it. And of course, there are the ones that spawn a field of darkness to make it so you can't see them, but they're stupidly easy to take down anyway. And frankly, it doesn't even matter what their abilities are because the enemy AI is so incredibly brain-dead stupid that quite literally the only way you will ever have any difficulty with them at all is when a whole bunch of them are all attacking you at once in solo play. If you're in co-op, then you'll never need to worry about it. They did include a stealth system where you can crouch and move up behind enemies to press the melee button and take them down instantly, but that only works on human enemies, and they're just one headshot away from dropping anyway, so why would you bother? You might think something along the lines of, well, DW, you might be really low on ammo, and okay, sure, just go around and melee one enemy, take their ammo, and then just mow down the rest of them. I mean, it's not like the game is stingy with ammo pickups. You can find it all over the damn place, so you're never really going to run out of ammo no matter what you do. And even then, you can find all kinds of weapons scattered around, so even if you do somehow run out of ammunition for one of the weapons you're using, just swap it out with another weapon in your inventory that does have ammo, and then continue on your merry way. Oh, and speaking of weapons, they couldn't even handle that properly, because you got 3 weapon slots, and you're just going to be swapping whatever you've got with the higher rarity and higher damage version of it that you're inevitably going to pick up about 5 minutes from now. Because of course it couldn't just be a first-person shooter, it couldn't just be a co-op based first-person shooter with really shitty co-op implementation, it had to be a looter shooter as well, because we've just got to keep ticking boxes here. Developers out there, news flash. The color-based rarity system is not good, it never has been good, and it does not make equipment satisfying to find or use. Stop using this system. And more importantly, stop trying to shoehorn said system into damn near everything these days. And the especially sad part is that Redfall uses a somehow even worse version of this system than most other looter shooters or looter-based games anyway. The weapons don't get interesting effects, they don't get anything that really sets them apart, it's just here, have a weapon with a bunch of extra numbers attached to it. Okay, numbers that I don't even really need because the enemies are too stupid for me to need them, and the only reason I'm even switching to this new weapon is because it has a higher damage number than the previous weapon, and if I don't switch to a weapon that does higher damage, then the enemies I'm going up against are just going to be even more bullet spongy than they already are because their health pools go up as your character levels up. And even as your character levels up, half of the abilities that you can unlock are only useful if you're playing it in co-op. If you're playing it in solo, then your upgrade path is extremely limited and has such an absolutely minimal effect on gameplay that you might as well just ignore it. Honestly, the entire gameplay loop of this thing is just so badly designed and so badly implemented, it makes me wonder if anybody playtested the game at all. Because you would think if this game were being playtested during its development, that they would have caught at least some of these problems and been like, hey, maybe we should fix this stuff, instead of just releasing it in such an absolutely pathetic state. And frankly, the gameplay in this is so insanely boring that I just can't bring myself to give a single solitary shit about anything else in it. The writing is just not very good. It's not the worst I've ever seen or anything, but it's just not very good, and it's hard to even give a shit about it when the gameplay itself is so obnoxiously boring, and everything is presented to you in such a bland and soulless way. I mean, after the very intro cutscene, the rest of the cutscenes are all done in a sort of static image format where it just goes through basically a slideshow and has some narration over it. That's a really boring way of doing cutscenes, especially when in previous Arcane games, they used actual cutscenes for the most part, and it worked pretty well. The cutscenes, if you can even call them that in Redfall, on the other hand, just do nothing to get you interested in what's happening. And outside of the cutscenes, when you go to talk to people, they're just not very interesting, and the readables are just not very interesting. They're mostly kind of mundane stuff, really. And so the writing department leaves you nothing solid to latch onto that might help carry you through the entire experience. I mean, to give you an idea of just how boring this game is, I actually found myself fixating on just how awful the weapon handling animations are, where your hands are constantly clipping through things in the weapons, and they're constantly handling things in weird ways, and it just looks bad. And ordinarily, graphics are something I really don't give much of a shit about as long as they don't interfere with my ability to play the game. But Redfall is such a bland, lifeless, soulless, and obnoxiously boring game that I was absolutely struggling to find anything in it to give a single solitary shit about, and apparently I ended up with the weapon handling animations are awful and that just bothers me a bit. It is something completely inconsequential, something that in any other game out there, I would really not give that much of a crap about. I might mention it during the presentation section of a review, but otherwise it wouldn't have really any major impact on the game whatsoever. And yet, that is the main takeaway I have from Redfall. They didn't even give enough of a crap to put proper weapon handling animations in. It is a game that leaves me with one question, and is one that I should never have to ask for any video game out there. Why does Redfall exist? Because this shit should have been caught during development. They should have looked at this thing, seen how much of a mess it was, and said, okay, look, we have two options here. One of them, we do a complete ground-up redesign of the game and actually make it something worth playing, or two, we just scrap the entire idea and move on to a different project. And in this particular case, they probably should have gone with the latter. They should have just scrapped Redfall entirely and then moved on to a different project, one that actually had a chance of being enjoyable. Meanwhile, Bethesda and Arcane Studios should have known from the rather poor reception that this got when it was first revealed that something was wrong, and the further they got into development, they should have realized that this is not what people wanted. And yet they released it anyway. And not only did they release it, they charged $70 US for it, MSRP. That is just fucking insulting. I have no idea what's going on at Arcane Studios right now, but they need to get their shit together. And Microsoft needs to get their shit together with the QC, because this is ridiculous. And the worst part is, I know that there is absolutely no saving Redfall, not without a ground-up redesign. They can patch up the technical issues all they want, but that's not going to save this thing. They need to just cut their losses, apologize for the shitty release, and move on. And speaking of moving on, that's basically all I have to say about Redfall. It is a vapid, soulless, obnoxiously boring game that has absolutely nothing to offer anybody, and thus everyone should avoid it entirely. And now that I've made this video on it, I am never going to go back to it again. I hope that Microsoft, Arcane, and Bethesda learned their lesson from this one. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like the videos I make, then please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine. I understand. Options there if you're interested, though. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.